Civilization promised humanity progress. Cities replaced wilderness. Kingdoms replaced tribes. Technology replaced tradition. And today, the modern world often looks back at the ancient way of life as primitive, uncivilized, even backward. Ask most people if they would ever return to the ways of our forefathers, and many would quickly answer, not in a million years. But perhaps the real question is not whether our ancestors were primitive. Perhaps the real question is this: did modern civilization make humanity more free or less free? Because long before borders divided the earth, there were people who lived in a way that modern humanity can hardly imagine. Among the last of these societies were the Khoi and the San of southern Africa. Long before kingdoms and empires emerged, the lands of southern Africa were home to communities that lived according to the rhythms of nature. The Khoi and the San moved across vast landscapes, following the seasons as they hunted animals and gathered wild vegetation. To the modern observer, this lifestyle is often described as nomadic. But that word alone cannot capture the reality of their world. These were people who lived without borders, without rulers, without the concept of owning the earth. The land was not property. It was life itself. Everything that roamed the plains, everything that moved through the skies, and everything that swam in the waters was part of a shared living world. And within this world, the Khoi and the San lived with remarkable balance. Their survival depended on deep knowledge of nature. They gathered wild plants, roots, berries, and vegetation, some of the most nutritionally rich foods found in the natural world. They hunted animals with carefully crafted bows and arrows. They fished in rivers and collected honey from the wilderness. But survival was not the only aspect of their lives. These were deeply family-oriented societies. Communities lived in small groups where knowledge was passed directly from elders to children. Young generations did not learn their skills from institutions or systems. They learned directly from their parents. They learned from the land itself. And in this way, wisdom moved naturally from one generation to the next. But human history would eventually reach a turning point that would transform the world forever. Agriculture. As people began cultivating crops and domesticating animals, many societies started to settle permanently in one place. Villages appeared. Villages became towns. And over time, towns grew into cities. This transformation allowed human populations to grow and develop complex societies. People could now cultivate crops suited for their needs and raise animals for food and labor. In many ways, this was a remarkable development in human history. But alongside these achievements came something humanity had rarely experienced before: ownership. As communities settled, land began to belong to specific groups. Territories formed. Kingdoms emerged. And with kingdoms came competition. Nations began fighting for land, resources, and control. Wars became part of the human story. And gradually, systems of domination began to appear. One of the most tragic of these systems was slavery. People were no longer free. They became subjects, servants, and laborers within structures controlled by powerful rulers. Even the hunter-gatherer societies who once roamed freely across the land were eventually disturbed. Their territories were taken. Their movements were restricted. The freedom they once knew slowly disappeared. By the 19th century, Forced labor had reached devastating levels across many parts of the world. Millions of people were taken from their lands and forced to work in distant territories. Families were separated. Languages were lost. Identities were erased. Entire communities suffered under systems that treated human beings as labor rather than as life. Eventually, resistance began to rise. Uprisings took place. Empires were forced to reconsider these systems. Over time, slavery was abolished in many parts of the world, and nations declared freedom for their people. But something important had already changed. Although the chains of slavery were broken, the systems that shaped those centuries had already influenced the human mind. Today, most societies proudly claim that their people are free. But when we look closely at modern life, a curious question begins to emerge. Are we truly free? Because in many ways, modern humans are still hunter-gatherers. The difference is what we hunt. Our ancestors hunted animals and gathered food from the land. Modern humans hunt something else entirely. Jobs, money, status. We believe that by obtaining these things, we will finally achieve freedom. But at the end of that pursuit, there are always systems, institutions, and authorities that control how those resources are used. And unlike our ancestors, we cannot always use them freely. Our forefathers hunted and gathered together with their families. Children learned survival skills directly from their elders. Knowledge was shared freely within the community. Their world had limits defined only by the horizon. But in modern society, individuals often work separately from their families. Skills are regulated by institutions. Knowledge is controlled by systems. And many people cannot freely pass their way of life to the next generation. In many ways, this has created a new form of dependence, one that most people rarely question. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about our ancestors is the belief that they lived lives of constant hardship. Certainly, their world had dangers. But it was also a world without borders, without rulers, and without systems that controlled every hour of their lives. The Khoi and the San walked freely across the lands of southern Africa, guided not by institutions, but by the rhythms of nature itself. Their wealth was not counted in coins. It was measured in knowledge, family, and freedom. Perhaps the greatest lesson their story leaves us is this: progress does not always mean improvement. And as an old African proverb reminds us, a tree that forgets its roots cannot stand against the wind. So the question remains, if given the choice, which form of hunter-gathering would you prefer? The ancient life of the Khoi and the San, roaming freely across the earth with family and community, or the modern hunt for money, jobs, and survival within systems we cannot control? Perhaps the most surprising realization is this: it may no longer be a choice at all.